go. We are starting and recording, and we'll give it a few minutes for everybody to enter, and then we'll get started because 45 minutes is going to go by very, very fast. I see some familiar names. Hi, Erin. Hi, Alyssa, Marilyn, Mindy, Nancy, Hannah, Bill. It's nice to see everybody here on this Saturday afternoon. I usually can't do things on Saturday, but today is a day off from teaching. So I figured it would be a great day to get started with these monthly Q&As that I will be hosting through Music Learning Academy. And I'll just talk about that for a minute. For those that don't know me, my name is Krista Yadro. I'm the owner of Music Learning Academy, and I'm going to start to offer monthly events. So last month we did a Christmas webinar workshop. This month we're doing a Q&A with Janna, and most of them are going to be question and answers on different topics, or even coffee chats and more of a meeting, more of an intimate format. But today we are so happy to welcome Janna Olson to answer some of your questions. Janna is part of the team for Music Learning Academy, and she's helping me to pilot this amazing mentoring program that is currently full, but she's expecting to be able to accommodate more teachers by the end of February. So if you're interested in joining the mentoring program, please don't hesitate to email me, kyadro@musiclearningacademy.com, and I'm going to get started. Welcome, Janna. Thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you so much for having me. It's just amazing to connect. We're very far apart, right? I'm up in the very cold north and you're down on the east, and I'm sure we've got people here from all around, and wonderful questions today.
Yes.
Exciting. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's very cold here today too. It was feels like -9 yesterday. So it's pretty chilly in the Boston area right now. Let's get started with our first question. And for those that are attending live today, if you have any questions as we are talking, please feel free to use the Q&A. I'll also be monitoring the chat as well. So Candy's asking, Janna, if I started a student at age 4, teaching using Gordon's principles, then after 3 years, start another student age 7, teaching using traditional methods, what differences would I see in the two students by age 10, assuming that they're both average students who maybe practice an average of 20 minutes 3 days a week?
Okay, that is a wonderful question, and there's maybe a lot in there to unpack, but I think just shortly, I'm biased, obviously, that I believe that the difference that using movement and singing and rhythm work, what we might call chanting, makes an absolutely significant difference in the goal that I have, which is that I'm aiming for lifelong learning. And I think we're all working towards that. So I feel that there is really not going to be a comparison. The one thing that I thought about is that when you teach using audiation, a student is able to process and retain so much more in the way of music, building towards music literacy, than they would be if they're decoding. And I'm assuming our traditional approach that she's referring to is, we're referring to using a note reading approach, where you might be learning through notation at the beginning. What the student who learns through audiation can play is going to be far and above exceed what the student who's learning. And now we're talking about average, and you're going to have difficulty making a really good definitive answer, because they're going to be so different based on aptitude and ability and their home situation. But just in short, and just from my experience, this is going to be a far and above their ability to be able to play, to retain, to even remember what they've played a year ago. When you think, if you're using music moves, when you think of the number of folk tunes that your students can pull out, even if they haven't played it for several months, and they can remember that, it's pretty amazing. And that's because it's lodging in their audiation. It's not just a finger memory, or just not a sort of a committed some kind of memory using a mnemonic device or something like that.
Absolutely. And not only play the folk tune, but arrange the folk tune and create an introduction and an ending and transpose it and change the tonality and do all these wonderful things to make it their own music, their own piece.
Yeah.
So Rochelle is asking, Janna, how do you know when a student is ready to start simple improvisation, either tonally or rhythmically? Or perhaps another way to ask the question, I have a student who can't seem to grasp that solfege syllables are associated with pitches and just seems to think they're random. She's been repeating the tonal major, tonic, and dominant patterns, but doesn't associate the syllables with pitches. So she improvises with random syllable pitch associations. Any advice on how to help her make this connection without over explanation? And for reference, this student is 7 years old.
Okay, so no panic and no rush. So there's a real important principle of patience when we're teaching. I would say that maybe not knowing the background of what Rochelle has been doing with this student so far, that it's always good to go back to verbal association and even oral levels of pattern work or working with repertoire. I think that would benefit her. I think, Krista, you would agree that tonal learning is quite a bit more difficult for students than rhythm learning. And we will very frequently sing a pattern, maybe do, mi, so, and hear do, mi, so back to us, right? Where the syllables, the pitches are different, but the syllables are not correct according to the pattern. So, and Krista, you and I both feel important. I think this is important to go back to the first pitch. So for those of you who know what that level of learning is, where we're singing a pattern and then the student is only singing the first pitch, and then we break it down a lot in my studio, so we may just very incrementally build up. So maybe just with tonic patterns, and then maybe just with dominant patterns. Improv, I just believe students can improvise at any level, but you may be doing this at an informal stage, similar to what you might do with an early childhood class, where you sing a beginning phrase and the student answers back with whatever, and we're not listening for correct or incorrect at that level. So anything you would add to that?
I think just the importance of sequencing. And when you're trying an activity where, maybe a generalization activity where I'm singing with a neutral syllable and they're supposed to be putting the syllables on there, if they're not getting it correct, kind of taking a step back and thinking to yourself, well, what do they need? Just like you said, maybe they need more verbal association. Maybe they need more oral, or just experience with the patterns before I'm asking them to do this specific step. And when they do get there and I know that they're ready to kind of dive into generalization, I help them out a lot. By the end of book one, they're asked to generalize even just tonic patterns or create tonic patterns with syllables. And I'll just take it one step at a time. I'll give them a pattern, a tonic pattern, bum, bum, bum. It starts with la, la, bum, bum. So I give them little hints and see how they do. But again, not pushing, just assessing to see what else they would need to be successful.
Absolutely. And don't shy away from improvisation in their repertoire. So when we're talking about maybe if we're talking about improvisation within the learning sequence, this is a little bit more formal and structured. But when we're working with pieces, whatever pieces they're playing or singing, using improvisation within the context of learning the little song or the piece.
Which is a perfect segue, Janna, to my next question, actually. Dan is asking, he would love to see some examples of improvisations with tonal patterns, some examples with improvising with one tonal pattern, and other examples with improvising with two or more tonal patterns.
Okay, great question. Can I just interject here? if you are using Music Moves curriculum, you are working with what we would maybe call folk songs, or the little pieces in that fall under the category of performance pieces. These are generally quite short, so those of you who know the repertoire will know they're not long pieces, and they are intentionally singable and playable for the most part. And I find that using the principles from those pieces, the tonal patterns and the essential rhythm patterns, are much more easy to pick out than you would if you were playing really long repertoire. So let me start by maybe giving you a couple examples from the Music Moves books, and then maybe I'll give you an example from a more standard repertoire piece. I really love Sneaking. This is in Book 1, Unit 11. And for those of you who don't know it, I'll just play the student part is. So the pattern that we're working with is do, ti. So improvising with that one can maybe, first of all, take the form of exploration. So I would have a student play all over the keyboard, not necessarily with rhythm at that moment. So they're exploring and they're finding do, ti. We might even use ti, do for fun, ti, do, going the other way. Then if we want to use rhythm, maybe staying in one place is a good place to start. So I'm really breaking this down again to be, you may have students who maybe can do much more than this at the beginning. But what if we say our rhythm pattern is do, de, do? Let's improvise with that 2 macrobeat pattern. Or do, de. Okay, let's do a 4 macrobeat pattern. Do, de, do, de, do, de, do. And I apologize if that feels too simple, but I know sometimes it's helpful to just see how it might break down once they can do that. How about using that same rhythm pattern and going, right? That would be a fun improvisation. There is no right in it, and I find every time I'm learning from my students what is possible because they come up with creative ideas. That's one rhythm pattern. What about Mexican dance? This is Book 3, Unit 3. What are our patterns? So, mi, fa, re, mi, do. I love that because they're pretty simple. There's 3 of them. They're really straightforward. If you have a student who is able, they could improvise with all 3 of them. Using one of them might, again, take the exploration approach. One of them with a rhythm. Do, de, do, to, de. Okay, I think probably you can imagine now when you're hearing that there's hundreds of options with it. Then a student would maybe use more of them. I find that encouraging them to use repeated notes is sometimes helpful, but they could go. When they start to play the actual tune, I try to move them into a new rhythm so that they could maybe, because they'll start to actually just try to play the tune. So we could maybe go. That might happen at the end. At that point in time, they're audiating, something like that. So that's working with a few patterns. One more quick example. So I was thinking about some of the repertoire I'm teaching currently. And one, I think I'll just do this without, okay, here we go. So there's a little musette. I'm assuming many of you know this. I love this one because, again, the patterns are quite easy to find. So we're talking about tonal patterns in this case. You would also work with rhythm patterns. So there's a clear progression from so, do. This is also kind of easy to sing if you're wanting to sing it in the key. Maybe can I just say really quick too while I'm on the thought. you don't have to sing the tonal pattern in the key that you're playing it in. When you're working with improvisation, might be much easier. So we've got so, do, and then we've got do, so, and we've got a very big do, mi. That's a really important one in this piece. So do, mi, and let's explore that in various places on the keyboard. Let's use with one hand, because that also helps them get the motion between it. And then we've got a really neat thing that happens. End of phrase 1 is so, mi, do, and the end of phrase 2 is. So we could take those patterns and improvise with them. Any thoughts, Krista?
Yeah, the only thing I wrote down to add was as soon as the G-do cadence is introduced in book 1, I have students start to improvise with those patterns as well. And we'll put a rhythm on each one of them. And then they have almost like their own little piece because they have a tonic, dominant, salting, and another dominant, and then back to their tonic. So I start them as soon as they can with improvising with the tonal patterns so that it becomes easier and more natural, especially when they go to the pieces and improvise with the patterns in the pieces.
Yes, great suggestion. So even when they're playing musette, they're probably in book 3 and have been doing D major. So you could even start with those patterns from the cadence. Yeah, great question.
All right, so our next, that was all the questions I had on improvisation. We're kind of going to go to RCM and rote repertoire now. Erin would like to know, I would love to see even a brief demonstration of applying or sneaking in audiation to help a traditional track early intermediate level student understand and perform a passage more correctly and with understanding. For instance, I've got a student just beginning level 2 RCM. His biggest challenge is a steady beat. His beat often fluctuates even within each measure. I have a feeling he might benefit from movement, but he may be too shy.
Okay, great question. Maybe let's I'll start by just maybe clarifying what the RCM is, just for people who don't know. So the Royal Conservatory of Music is a long-standing Canadian institution, but I know that the books are now also available in the United States. So for those of you who haven't seen it, I'll just hold up a couple of examples here. So this would be an early level repertoire, and we're going to talk about these again in a moment. And they are a series of books that has 2 introductory books and then goes through from level 1 until 10 collections of repertoire of a wide variety, from very early music to very recently composed music. So they're just really collections of pieces, piano pieces. Movement for a student when you're wanting to kind of sneak audiation in, you'll have to be the judge. I'll just share a few thoughts from helping students who are more transfer students into moving. Movement is going to be your best friend when it comes to helping them with the rhythm problems that you're experiencing. The watch please game is very useful. And I do find that most of my students are not shy about doing the watch please game. So it depends. So for those of you who use it, you'll know we do a beat in our heels, macrobeat in our heels, microbeats in our hands, and then we will say the melodic rhythm patterns. So we're layering as we go. So that to me is my number 1 go-to activity for rhythm. But other movement activities are useful, especially anything that involves a kind of a free-flowing motion. So have a list of some of the ones that I find most useful, and that might be, if you think about Laban movement as a guide. So if you know Laban movement, we're talking about a continuum between light and then more heavy or bound versus free. Some of the activities I find best work would be an infinity sign. So using the sideways figure 8 kind of motion. Usually students are comfortable doing that. Circles, so you can do circles with your arms. And one of the things that happens in phys ed classes is that you're going to warm up doing arm circles. So that can all easily be something, just slow arm circles, big arm circles, small arm circles, body circles, head circles, shoulder circles, right? Any of those kind of movements I find are really good entry level movements for students. Mirror movement. So I do something and they copy me. That can really work well and is fun. It takes the self-consciousness out of it because they have to copy what you do. Athletic movement. So some of the movements that you'll find listed in Music Moves involve even just skating movement. Swimming is really great. So, you know, practice your front crawl. Jumping, skiing, snowboarding, riding on a skateboard. If you're standing, just balancing and moving around. And I already said roll your arms. You can do this motion too. So I'm hoping those are helpful. Those are ones I've found very successful to get a student moving. So that's the movement part of the question. What was the other part of the question? Beginning RCM level 2. Okay, so the repertoire that we're experiencing at about that level, and I'll maybe hold up a book if people are interested in seeing the collection. So I think Erin is referring to this. Here's a example of the level of repertoire. On those little ornaments. So movement, a few things I've done with this one. Just a free-flowing movement, just some kind of like flowing arm movement while you're listening to it. Find the macrobeats and the microbeats. So one at a time for a student who's uncomfortable, let's find the macrobeats while we're listening. Where is the macrobeat? And it's interesting with this one, you might not get the same macrobeat per student, and that's okay. Find the microbeats. Did that macrobeat divide into 2 or 3? So we're asking that all the time. Then we're going to talk about rhythm in the context of same or different. So once we know, is that rhythm the same as this rhythm? So listen to that pattern, neutral syllable, echo it on with syllables. So first rhythm pattern, let's use the macrobeat is the quarter note in this case. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, ba, echo my pattern. Do, day, do, day, do, do. And just use that kind of sequencing, I think, will really make a difference for it. You can also use the freeze game to help them sort of listen for tonality, but I know you're thinking of rhythm problems most of the time. So begin with rhythm and then move beyond that. Anything else, Krista, that I'm missing with that?
Not that I can think of. No, I think we're good to move on to the next.
Hopefully, Erin, that gives you an example, enough of an example from that level of repertoire.
He just said in the chat, he said, thank you, that's very helpful.
Okay, perfect. So I see that now too, yeah.
So another RCM question. How do the lesson books, the Music Moves for Piano books, correspond to RCM conservatory levels? So this is there's a couple questions in here. I'll read them all and then you can take them one by one.
Okay.
And then do you always teach by rote when teaching a grade 1, 2, or 3 piece? And when and in which lesson book do you begin to use the writing books?
Okay, good. So let's tackle how do lesson books correspond with the RCM conservatory levels? Okay, and Suzanne, I'm thinking if you're in the Canadian system, I'll refer also to our school system, because I feel like I have 3 things I'm thinking of all the time in my lessons. What's the age of the student? When did they start lessons? So that will play a big role in what kind of repertoire I'm choosing for them, because they may want slightly more sophisticated sounding repertoire than a 9-year-old versus a 6-year-old. So that's always in my mind when I'm selecting repertoire. The Music Moves books, I think of a little bit more according to their age, where they are in school. So when I'm thinking about book 3 is a very crucial moment. I'm wanting them to be getting into book 3 when they are in grade 4 or 5 in school. So in Canada, we usually refer to our grades as grade 4, so 4th grade or 5th grade. You'll know what I mean. And that would depend on when they start and many other factors, but their musical development is best served if they can be using book 3 when they are about grade 4 or 5 in school. And I have a group of 10-year-olds right now, so they're in grade 5 in school. So I kind of use them as a little research group to see where they are. And they're all in book 3 at various levels, and they are in RCM levels ranging from level 2 to level 5. So that's a really wide range, and that just depends on how much they practice at home, what kind of parental support they have, what their interest level is, how busy they are. It's just so many factors. So I really leave it pretty open, but I'm thinking about the Music Moves books more according to their age and when they've started. It's most helpful for them to be starting book 4 when they're in grade 6 in school. By that time, they're usually hopefully playing at about a level 4 to level 5 level RCM repertoire. So that's my answer to that. Anything to add to that, Krista?
No, I think that's very helpful, and that I do about the same. Book 3, I'd love for them to be in there about 9.5 years old. So that's about third grade,
Yes,
um,
it's
third grade year.
it's lovely if they're getting into book 3 when they're still in grade 3 in school. It's a dream. It just doesn't happen unless you're getting them quite early. And I'm finding that I'm often getting 8 or 9-year-old beginners. And so
Okay.
look very different. But then, then the challenge begins to figure out how to sequentially take them to the place where they really need to be. Do I always teach by rote for grade 1, 2, or 3 pieces for level 1, 2, or 3? Okay. I think so. Many of you will know I was a Suzuki student. So I started in a Suzuki program, and I benefited greatly from the rote approach of the Suzuki because I was an early reader. But I feel really strongly, I would say like an insistent emphasis for me on context when I'm teaching away from the score. So that means that even though I'm thinking of rote teaching in this way as being apart from the score, that we're learning without looking at the notation as our initial process of learning. We are not looking at notation and then playing. We're listening, playing, and then looking at notation. So it's a little bit of a reversed process, and I feel really strongly about that audiation approach, and I don't reserve that only for levels 1 to 3. That happens at all levels, all the way up to my most advanced students. I'm attempting to always use an oral approach to that. When they are 9 and 10 years old, I begin to invest more time in score activities. But we always start with movement, establishing the context of tonality and rhythm, and then doing same and different activities, which is such an easy way of, even with advanced students, just having them look away from the piano. They may have heard that piece or even have tried it before, but ask them, is this phrase the same or different? Is that rhythm the same or different? Are those tonal patterns the same? Are we in the same tonality? Are we in a different keyality? Just really asking those audiation questions as you would go. So I'm hoping that answers. I do teach by rote in the sense that I'm away from the score, and I do that often, even with, I taught a level 7 student this week with a Clementi sonatina that I taught entirely away from the score for the first theme section of the sonatina. And it didn't take that long because he's been doing this so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think that's so important to remember, that listen, set context, then play, and then go to the page. I think that's really helpful, and especially other teachers that maybe are transitioning studios and they're not sure what to do with students that already might be reading, well, what do I do? Well, that's great advice. Listen first, set context, play, and then go to the page.
And it's time well spent, because it is so easy to get in a hurry, and I'm guilty of that all the time. But in your lesson, you're thinking, oh, okay, we want to start this piece, and I got to send them home with something to practice, and they want to learn it. And when you rush, if I eliminate the movement activity at the beginning, I often feel like the rhythm, it might be sort of correct, but it's not really settled. And then I'm doing correction, right? We have that old, you're running a house of correction in your teaching, and I don't want to do that. So like, just a much more patient, taking time to set the foundations. There's not a rush in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then she also asked, when in which lesson book? Okay, the writing books. Oh, this is so dependent. It's hard to give a general answer. I would say partly it's dependent on interest, and at the point when they start. I use the principles from the reading or writing book very early in lessons, and that would maybe be one thing I would really encourage new teachers to take away, is that you want to look less at the activities as prescribed activities and more activities that are based on principles of learning. So when we read and write rhythm patterns, we're reading and writing them in rhythmically, so that we're not getting bound by only a 3/4 time signature or only a 6/8 time signature. We really want this to come from an oral perspective. So the activities, though, practically speaking, that I use, the 5 note parts, thank you, Marilyn, that's a brilliant activity that can be started very early. A lot of, I know we use the word pre-reading. I think I like the phrase notational preparation activities. So many notational preparation activities, and Marilyn has outlined a wonderful section. If you haven't read it, I think it's page 148 or 149 in the teacher lesson guide. I can look that up quick. She has an excellent list of notational preparation activities that you can take and just begin to integrate that into your teaching, so that it doesn't become a compartmentalized aspect. And I choose activities. They can begin to read and write rhythm patterns earlier, I find, than tonal patterns. I think you've experienced that too, Krista. And I often, just one other quick thought, I ask frequently, what are you learning in school? And then I try anyway, to mitigate confusion by introducing activities that will help them with their understanding, and make sure they're not thinking, well, I learned one thing in school. I learned that a quarter note has 1 beat, but now you're telling me it has 2, or that it is getting kind of a half of a beat, right? So I try to help them work through some of those confusion points.
I just had a thought. Now I can't remember what it was. Oh, I think some people, I know I did in the past, think that reading is a no-no until you get to symbolic association. But notation is not a no-no before you get there. Just like in I'm reading my kids' books before they can read, and they're having experience with it and exploring it. And just the other day, one of my book 1 students was reviewing Bumblebee, and he couldn't remember where the hands go. So he looked at the notation and he thought, oh, and he saw the movement of his parts, and he figured it out from there. So I thought that was a great thing for him to do. Even though he wasn't reading the exact notation, he was looking for clues, looking what was same, looking what was different, and it helped him to play the piece.
Yes. Yeah.
So our next question, Andrea is asking, she says, not necessarily an MLT question, but it relates because of the way that we teach and finding really good rote repertoire for students. Do you have an extensive lending library? If so, how do you organize it and keep track of lending it out? And if not, how do you get really good music that is MLT friendly to your students without having them to spend a fortune on music? So many times I never get books back from students. I know that. Also, too often in a book, there's only 1 or 2 good pieces. I'm tempted to use copies as a practice copy since I already own the books. I'm just looking forward to your ideas and ways that you have handled this.
Yeah. Oh, there's lots in there, and that's a really good practical question. Yes, lending. Maybe the idea of practice copies, I should say, first of all, you need to know what the copyright laws are in your particular country or your area, your state or province where you're living. So just to be cautious about that. Back to the idea of teaching through audiation. One of the funny things that I've noticed over the years is that my students actually don't need the score as much. They don't rely on the score, and they don't, when they do use it, they're not necessarily using it very long. It may be short-lived until they get to be more advanced. So a couple of things. I would say that books then are sometimes lent out for a shorter period of time. I have been teaching pedagogy for a long time, and so I have a very extensive library of books that are part of my sort of pedagogy collection of books. Many things I don't use, but I draw from that. I would say that the Royal Conservatory books, and again, I'm speaking as a sort of in the Canadian system, they are really a wonderful collection of variety, and you're going to probably use many more than just one of the pieces in the book. So they are worth it. And there are other excellent collections. I think someone put in the chat, yeah, Keith Snell books have a similar setup to the Royal Conservatory books. Jane McGraw has done a wonderful job of putting together some collections. If you're wanting variety, it's nice to get a series of books that has old and new. Our Canadian books also focus on pedagogical tradition, which we have an amazing pedagogical tradition here in Canada of people who have written kind of on the shoulders of people like Boris Berlin. For some of you, you'll remember those old pieces started in the Russian school of really writing pieces with a pedagogical intent. So I think that I have also had something happen which I've really loved, and that is my students are donating books back that they are finished with. So when we have bought something, it's being used multiple times, and that I've noticed in the past couple of years. I have loved that. So I have a little recycling section, and we get it out, and I put a new label with their name on it, and then I do keep track, probably not as carefully. There is always going to be books that are left, but if you can have some kind of a lending system, and I sometimes put that on the bulletin board so that it's actually visible, so people are seeing. And now because of being online, obviously things are not the same, and there's more scanning of copies or using other systems. Just as far as collections go, if you haven't used Little Gems, that's got a lot of wonderful pieces in it that you can, I think most people will know, the Little Gems for Piano. The early books that I use, again, I really like these early repertoire books. There's a level A and there's a level B. That's for the Royal Conservatory. And those, the collection is varied, and because you're going to have students that are not always attracted to certain pieces either. So
I'm going to add, I think Greg read my mind for part of his comment here. Some composers have studio licenses, which Little Gems does, I believe. So you can buy a studio license and then you can copy the music whenever you'd like to. Greg also says that also used book sales are a wonderful place to get music albums you can lend to students. If the book doesn't come back, then it's not your own original copy.
yes, and some books are worth having multiple copies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I do have go-to books that I use. I would say one of the composers that I go back to a lot is Anne Crosby Godet, who also has studio license. And I see Janet Geek is on here today. She's a wonderful Canadian composer who's written, I think I might even have it close by here. She's written something I use a lot of, the Old Time Candy Shop, which has really wonderful pieces in it that my students enjoy playing. So,
and she's here. That's special.
Yeah, I think I saw her name anyway.
Yes, I just saw it.
Yeah.
So Janna, we have one more question that was submitted. Then I also have two questions, one from the chat and one from the Q&A. So if we can get to all three of those, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
We can probably go over a couple minutes because I think we started a couple
minutes. Okay, sure.
So Ciliana wants to know, her main question is why Gordon chose movable do. Was he influenced by others since it was the system predominantly used in the United States? Also, what is the advantage of using that versus fixed do? This could probably go on for much longer than 5 minutes, but just the beginnings.
Yeah, but it is a wonderful question, and just to preface it by saying there's no perfect system. You're not going to be able to defend the system you use all the way through. But I feel like Gordon has written about this in some very clear ways. And one is that the movable do and the law-based minor offers so much more possibility for musical understanding. So if many of those systems will benefit you if you're reading musical notation. Not really the only system is the movable do la-based minor for fostering audiation. That's why he chose that, because his whole goal and intent was that we want our students, or we want ourselves, we all want to be learning how to audiate, and this is a tool. I was thinking about some of the things with regards to this, so maybe you can reference a few of the pages. Chapter 4 in the Learning Sequences of Music is all about tonal and rhythm solfege, and he has a really good summary in the study guide if you're wanting something that just kind of sums things up for you. I like something he wrote in the study guide, so I'm going to just read this because I go back to this several times. As students engage at higher levels of discrimination learning and all levels of inference learning more and more, they have a less conscious need to use syllables. Syllables remain part of the student's unconscious audiation until they feel a need to bring them into consciousness. And that reminds me always of something a very special memory I have from a discussion with Dr. Gordon, that tonal syllables, all solfege in fact, is a tool. It is not meant to be the only thing you do. It's a tool that you use in the learning process and to help with your audiation. And then he said, when you've used it, you put it back in your pocket, and then you get it out again when you need it again. And I've used that many times. I think about that all the time. Maybe just one other thought about that is it emphasizes audiation and tonality regardless of keyality. So that, I think, really helps me understand. Whereas if you have another system, it might be based more on keyality. So we're thinking in those terms, if you know those terms, keyality is going to refer to the actual letter name of the key that we're in. And the tonality is referring to something that sometimes has been referred to as modes, but we use tonality more to refer to major, minor, Dorian, Mixolydian. We could talk about that a lot. I think hopefully that just gets you started thinking about it. There's many. I would refer you to Learning Sequences in Music, page 153. That's from my 2007 edition. I would say that when we teach tonal patterns, they're always taught in a tonal context. And that, for me, is why I would probably choose to use this system myself. If you want to research a little bit about why he chose it, he really did think about many different systems and looked at the history of it, which is really long, hundreds and hundreds of years. So we're talking, if you really want to go, and Marilyn Lowe and Gregory Chase, who's on today, he would be an excellent resource if you want to get in contact with him. He's done quite a bit of reading about it. And then one more thought, because she was talking about perfect pitch, I believe. Audiation, I feel, is always important and can be learned regardless of perfect pitch. So I think some people feel, oh, because I don't have it, maybe I'm a lesser musician. And I just would really strongly recommend that we don't have that mindset. Perfect pitch is not a prerequisite for musical enjoyment and understanding. Audiation, I believe, is. So
Thank you, Janna. And let's see, our two other questions. Let me just scroll in the chat. And also Hannah shared, she put it just to the panelists. If you want to do to the attendees too, Hannah. A great book is Taking a Reasonable and Honest Look at Tonal Solfege and Rhythm Solfege by Dr. Gordon as well. So a whole book dedicated
Yes.
to this choice. Mindy's asking, Janna, I'm starting with a brand new student virtually. She's 11 years old. I'm just a beginner myself with understanding the audiation methodology. What could be one or two key audiation efforts I could incorporate with this new older student?
Okay. Excellent question. If you begin with maybe one thing that you're quite comfortable with. So if you are comfortable with movement, to start to incorporate movement into the learning process. I began with rhythm when I was first learning because I found it was so foundational. You'll often see a student maybe struggling with something that's new, and I would say the problem is so very often that they aren't quite audiating the rhythm or they're understanding it. So that would be an entry level. Carefully choosing repertoire. So begin with what is workable. If you can use the folk song repertoire, it just provides a really excellent foundation for learning other repertoire. It's a really good, strong foundation. Anything else you would add, Krista? That's a loaded question too.
It is. I like how you say, though, start with what you're comfortable with, because there are really a lot of things that you can start with. You can start with adding patterns. You can start with adding movement. You can start with improvisation, but picking what you're comfortable with, and knowing that you don't have to jump fully in at first if you're not comfortable with it, and just kind of dip your toe and see how it goes, and then add something else afterwards. And Mindy, if you're interested in using, say, like keyboard games books too, with an older student, those short pieces can be used as warm-ups, and to do something with those pieces as well, and kind of experiment and create with them. Could be an idea for an older student. And then lastly, Janna, this one is a follow-up from Janet to what you had mentioned previously. If you have an 8 or 9-year-old beginner, how do you sequence things so they can get to book 3 faster?
Okay. Yeah, boy, I'm thinking that this is almost a topic that keeps coming up so frequently and one I think about all the time, that it could be really a separate discussion group that we could have, because it's a very important question when you're not starting a student and you're not seeing their development from 5 or 6 years old. I tell parents, can you give me a couple of months to muddle around a little bit with them? I promise I'm not doing them harm, but I'm going to need a while to sort of see where they are. And I have a very good example of a new 9-year-old who I just started at the beginning of October. And she comes from a musical background. Her mom is a singer-songwriter, and she's grown up with being near the band during recording sessions and has had lots of musical experience. So she's coming to me with a much larger musical vocabulary than maybe another student, the average student. So my sequencing of this is, I think about the elements of the lesson, and I'll try to say this quickly. So as outlined in Music Moves, we've been talking about this week with another group of teachers, that there are technical elements, and there are movement elements, and there are tonality and rhythm that is applied both in a learning sequence and in the repertoire that we learn. And then we've got reading elements, which may be pre-notational activities or whatever you're doing. And we've got the improvisation, creativity, exploration activities. So I think I've gotten them all. I sort of think of them in as letters. Then with those, I'm thinking of each one of those elements. Where is the student at technically? How comfortable are they using all 5 fingers? So what I do with them then, they may learn springtime within the first month of lessons rather than waiting until the end of book 1 for that. But I still tend to use all of the keyboard games, not all of the pieces, but a very large percentage of them as warm-ups, and a lot of the pieces at the beginning of book 1 as things I do in the lesson. And then I'm looking for repertoire right away that they're capable of playing as we would maybe term rote repertoire. And I'm working them through the tonal and rhythm learning sequences much more quickly than a 6-year-old would do. Yeah, but maybe we can do a follow-up on that, because that probably only just barely touches what happens.
We're getting a lot of follow-up ideas from this Q&A. And Mindy just had one follow-up question. The folk songs, are they in keyboard games or the Music Moves books?
And I've sort of hesitated when I use that. We're talking about folk songs in a very general way, and these are maybe defined as singable and playable short tunes that also harmonize really well and are transposable and usable for creative activities. So not all of the little pieces that we have in keyboard games and book 1 especially are going to be considered to be folk song repertoire. I would say by the time we get to book 3, most of them are very tuneful. Sorry, what was the question? That was
She was just looking for where the folk songs are, and it might be helpful too that the audio that goes with the Music Moves books is available on musicmovesforpiano.com, so you can listen to the audio and kind of get an idea of what types of pieces are in the keyboard games books, and then what types of pieces are in book 1 versus book 2. I think book 2 has a lot of folk tunes in it as well, and then they start to do a lot with those folk tunes in book 3. So that might be a really helpful thing to do.
Yes. And the keyboard games repertoire is just absolutely brilliant for helping a student, because it really isn't so age specific that you can't use it with older students. And I love it for its exploration of the keyboard, the rhythmic development that can happen, its possibility for improvisation and making changes and listening for same and different sound development. There's just many things you can do with that repertoire and incorporate it in short ways. They're short, so you can learn them more quickly too, right?
Yes, exactly. And I see a difference in students that did not have keyboard games versus the ones that did have keyboard games, or at least, a few months of keyboard games versus none at all.
The technical development is very significant when you use them. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So our time, oh, yes. Okay. So our time is up for today. Janna, I want to thank you again for doing this Q&A with me. You'll be seeing a lot more of Janna again in our mentoring program. If you're interested, she'll be taking more teachers on the end of February. This is not just for Music Moves for piano teachers. If you're interested in applying audiation in your piano studio, whether you're just beginning, mentoring might be a great option for you if you'd really want some one-on-one help. So thank you everybody for coming today. And this will be, this is recorded and will be placed on the website soon if you'd like to watch again. Bye. Bye, Janna.
Bye.